All right. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to the maiden voyage of the Shade Tree Intellectual. We've got a really great conversation that's going to happen today. Um, we've got Augie and Charles, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Kind of go from there. What we'll do is we'll probably structure this argument around 1 point per individual, and we'll kind of focus on each one of those at a time. But we really want to kind of dig into this and really give Kendi a good amount of charity here, and believe that he's actually written this book for a better purpose. I'm personally glad that I was asked to do this with Augie and Charles, because having read it 2 years ago, I'm grateful that I'm reading it again, because I realized that I was very, very harsh on Kendi. I was disproportionately harsh on Kendi. And now going through it again, I'm realizing he did really have some fine points and some fine attitudes. His argument kind of falls apart in a couple places, which I hope we'll actually discuss today. But I think Kendi's a good human being, and I want to give him the charity of having a good, rational conversation. I wish he would go on debates, but he doesn't. So it makes it difficult to get a finality on his opinions. But today we're going to have a couple of guys on here and hopefully have that conversation. So everybody, welcome. And Charles and Augie, welcome, guys. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you, Steve. Thank for having me on this conversation. I believe it's going to be a very interesting one. So it's good to be here.
Uh,
Fantastic.
Thank you, Steve and Charles. Very excited to be here, exchanging ideas with you, awesome gentlemen, and definitely can't wait to get in.
All right. So, Charles, you are the host of Critical African Thinkers on YouTube. If you would tell the viewers a little bit about that.
Okay, so basically, Critical African Thinkers is a podcast on YouTube where our motto is to question everything, and we try to examine everything under the microscope of logic to find out which is most factual and logically consistent. So we're a community of diverse voices, of diverse opinions, diverse ideological possessions, religious persuasions, gender or sexual orientations. You get so the purpose of the podcast is to bring in people that have different opinions to just talk, in a very civil and respectful manner, because at times I think we have more in common than we care to know or than we care to acknowledge. And if people would just sit down and have an honest conversation, you find that a lot of the time it boils down to semantic differences, because ultimately everybody wants what's best for the world. It may just be our manner of approach that's different. You understand? So I
Yeah.
try to create that space where I give everybody, you know, it's an open platform where I encourage free and open discourse. Anybody can come share their opinion and their thoughts, but also be ready for a pushback, be ready for questions, be ready to, to defend your position or to prove your points. And if you're able to do that, you might be able to, change some minds. So that's basically what Critical African Thinkers is about. And I also write on Substack. I think I write bi-weekly now on Substack on issues too, philosophy, race, religion, all that stuff. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we should definitely get your information for your Substack, and be able to share all of your links down in the description box. Um, so, Augie, tell us a little bit about you and yourself and what you're doing and why you're here, and just give us a heads up on what you do and why you do it and why you're here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. I obviously my name is Ogie. I am father to a beautiful daughter, husband to a even more beautiful and amazing wife. I am a social worker by profession, so I work with seniors who I love and adore dearly. Passions of mine is I am an avid learner. I've been on this journey of self-discovery, through a process of just basically steeping myself in historical studies and learning, because I, kind of got to a point in my life where I felt that a lot of people, especially within the academic environment that I interacted with, were not able to give me the answers that I sought in terms of understanding the current and historical situation of things as pertains to race and racial relations and racism. Yeah, basically decided to spend um, a good amount of time figuring things out for myself, and it's been quite the journey. Um, yeah, I think I'm obviously excited to be here with you, Steve and Charles. To take a deep dive into a very interesting book with interesting insights. And yeah, I was just hoping we could definitely be, how would I put it? Definitely dive in. And as per things that I am currently doing now, I'm currently working on a module that is geared to simplify the understanding of the concept of race from a what I would call or term a layman standpoint. Um, because I feel like it's really important, when dealing with racism or race-based issues, to really have a good grasp of the language. So that's pretty much my spiel. Thank you, Steve.
Fantastic. So how did you find Charles and the rest of the group?
Ah, good question. I coincidentally I found Charles through Dr. Mason.
Ah,
Yeah, Dr. Mason. She's a resource in herself.
yeah, same here.
Yeah, so much respect for her. Yeah, see, she was able to connect me on her Discord, and yeah, Charles reached out, and the rest is history.
Charles and Dr. Mason are the reason why this is even happening right now. So I have to give a huge shout out to them and thank them for, giving me the opportunity to come into their spaces and have great conversations. And Dr. Mason has taken so much of her time to educate this old mechanic about, her idea and her theory. And Charles has given me a room to cut my teeth publicly, so to speak. So I really have to thank both of those two for everything that they've done. And there's a couple of other people I would like to thank before we start. Stanley is one of those people. He does not let me get away with anything. He constantly pushes me, makes me really have a strong point. Like you can't have an unformed thought and just throw it out there, because he'll crush it. You got to come with the heat. You got to come with the knowledge. You got to be knowledgeable about the material. And so I'm very grateful for him as well. Anon has a really numbers driven mentality. He really kind of goes for those numbers. And so all of these individuals, they have their own unique perspectives and their own unique abilities. And, where we really shine is when we're able to take all those different voices and different ideas and put them towards something. I mean, we've done pretty good, I think, as far as like getting guests, and Charles has had some amazing guests on his show. You guys need to go to his channel and like and subscribe to his content. It really is fascinating, and they just have really great conversations. He has the best panels by far. But yeah, there's just a lot of great people that played a role in this coming to being, and a couple of my other efforts and endeavors. So let's get into it. Charles, would you like to go first? We'll give you the honors of kind of going first, and give us your perspective. Give us your argument.
Whoa. Well, Steve, that was a lot. Thank you for all those kind words. I hope I'm deserving of them, and I hope I can live up to them or continue living up to them. So Kendi, we're talking about Ibrahim X. Kendi today and his book How to Be an Anti-Racist. Now, my journey with Kendi started with Glenn Lowry, which I adore a lot. You know, I watch Glenn and John McWhorter have their shows. I think their bi-weekly show. I always listen to their conversations. And in one of those conversations, Glenn Lowry passionately called Ibrahim X. Kendi a lightweight. And Glenn Lowry said he wasn't going to read Kendi's book, and he thought there was nothing of substance there. But because Glenn Lowry said he wasn't, immediately my antennas were up. I mean, I was like, okay, you're not going to read this book, so based on what would you be critiquing this person? You understand? If you're not going to read this book at all, if you're not going to do him the courtesy of trying to understand his arguments before critiquing him, even though I sort of made that mistake, but not to the extent that Glenn did, because I watched a couple of interviews of him talking about the book and giving his definitions. And frankly, I was appalled by his definitions because they were just circular. And then I made a video about that, and I continued in the spirit of Glenn Lowry to give my own critique, understand, and say, yeah, that is a lightweight. But anyhow, I received one comment in that video, because I did admit that okay, I hadn't actually read the book, but my critique was based off of the videos that I had seen of him. And then someone commented that if I hadn't read the book, how am I so sure that my analysis is correct and all that? And I thought about that, and I said, yeah, this person has a point. I mean, maybe there's more to Kendi. Maybe there's more to his definitions. Maybe there's more to his work. And frankly, I would say that yes, there was more to it. There was more to his work. There was more to the book. And I found myself agreeing with him a lot on some things, but there is one area where I just could not agree so much with him, which was his definition of things. I mean, in a general sense, if Kendi just took out the secular definition and the racial underpinnings, he's actually onto something, I would say. But his secular definitions and the projections on race and possibly the solutions that he prefers, which is, for us to get a racially equitable society, then there must be some sort of discrimination. That discrimination that produces racial equity is ultimately desirable and should be the policy going forward. So in that sense, that's just my basic sum of what Kendi, what I've understood from his book. But we're going to delve into more
let's
of
hold
it
on
later.
For a second.
Yeah.
Hold on for a second. This bloody thing. There it is. All right, we should be good now. All right, we should be good.
Okay, so I hope what I said was captured, because so that'll be it for me for now, and we'll get more into it later. So over to you, Steve.
Well, I'm screwing this up so bad.
What's the challenge?
I'm trying to get rid of this stupid share screen, but it won't give me the choice. So
you're trying to get rid of the share screen.
There we go.
But we're seeing ourselves right now. I'm seeing you, myself, and Ogie on the screen. So
yeah, it won't let me kick in. For crying out loud. Yeah, I screwed it up. Is anybody else getting an echo?
No. Oh, are you getting an echo, Steve?
No, not on my end.
Steve, are you logged into YouTube at the same time? Are you logged into your channel at the same time?
Yeah, it's okay. It was just it was a
You
feature
have
that
to
I
close
haven't
your
used
channel.
before.
Okay.
No, I was basically looping the share screen, and I couldn't get rid of it. So yeah, I screwed it up. Anyways, so what remind me again, what was the issue that you have with Kendi?
Well, his definitions mostly and his solutions.
Right.
I think he correctly identified problems, but the problems he identified, he couldn't. I would say the labels he put on them were not appropriate, and the solutions he was preferring, I have issues with. So,
Gotcha. Augie, what's your main gripe?
My main gripe is, let's just say, coming away from my learnings, especially learnings on um, the construction of race and um, people's discriminatory practices based on that, the belief in that construction. I've always been the person to pay attention to people's language when they either try to describe things they perceive as race, because I understand that, the whole idea of race, aside from obviously trying to steal people's labor, is something that's hugely political. So I kind of try to hone into to people's language to kind of get if they are actually seeking tangible solutions. Once again, I'm gonna give Dr. Sheena Mason a shout out because I think she is. Or, they're trying to play the political angle. So what actually got me onto Kendi was a tweet he posted, which I kind of responded to. So the tweet, my understanding is from this book, How to Become an Anti-Racist. So he basically says, to be an anti-racist is to think nothing is behaviorally wrong or right, inferior or superior with any of the racial groups. Okay, so I had to pause there.
Gotcha.
Whenever anti-racist sees individuals behaving positively or negatively, the anti-racist sees exactly that: individuals behaving positively or negatively, not representatives of whole races. I had to pause on that too. To be anti-racist is to deracialize behavior, to remove the tattooed stereotype from every racialized body. Behavior is something humans do, not races. Sorry, behavior is something humans do, not races do. So end quote. To which my response was, when someone utilizes the word races or racial groups, I tend to pay attention to anything else that comes after that.
Right.
Typically, most end up conflating their argument, even when their intentions are good, as the word in itself denotes group homogeneity. Still a problematic take.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for me is it was looking at him as as an academic and as an activist, obviously understanding that he probably has access to more information than I ever could. But then, asking the question of how, if he does indeed have access to all that amount of information, how am I getting out of his comment such significant amount of conflation. So,
Right.
so that for me was, was pretty hard to reconcile, because I could see that, it appeared that he was kind of caught in this, and race or race-based thinking actually does this to you, where you are, it's almost like you're talking out of two sides of your mouth,
Yeah.
right? You're trying to pull apart the individual from this constructed group, but then again, you're working from within the group. So that, so with Kendi, my the reason why I, obviously decided to look closely into his work was just more to see, more to get a more contextual understanding of his worldview and how he sees things. So that's pretty much how I got acquainted with Kendi's work.
Yeah. So I read it, early last year, or was it 2020? I don't know. I read so many books. It's hard to remember exactly when I read it. I just know it was a long time ago. I think it was at the beginning of last year or the end of 2020. And I think, the thing that struck me so significantly was the logic that he was using to kind of argue for his points. I think I started to have clues on what he was going to go for early on when he continuously mentions these black and white binaries. He's very, very binary in how he presents these issues. But what really kind of clinched it was at the very end. It's either you are an anti-racist or you are a racist, basically. You know what I mean? He gave a very sharp, stern, like, that's it, that's all there is. And he's started another school that is supposed to be studying, anti-racism, and because there's already a section of some groups that have whiteness studies, but we're not going to get into that. What I did like about him, though, is that he gave us his journey, how he came from when he was younger to now being a mature man, an educated man, just having that journey, being able to follow his journey through that helped me realize where he was coming from a little bit better. And, this last time that I read it, I really started to understand that, he was really kind of cataloging and explaining his experience with race, with himself. And I really kind of appreciated that. I didn't give that much credibility the first time I read it. And when I went back and I read it this time, I listened to the audiobook because I had to work. And I remember listening to him talk about, first and foremost, like letting go of what he thought was the thug, black guy that he was trying to be, and stayed in that weird limbo for a minute, and then was like, all right, well, I'm going to go to school. I'm just going to hit those books, and I'm going to be, I'm going to get this degree. And then he changed the way that he viewed himself racially. And then he did that again once he became a professor and a husband and all this other stuff. So he's gone through 3 shifts of racially viewing himself, which is a really, like, I can understand looking at yourself in different stages of life, but I could never imagine looking at those stages of life, having the anchor point of each one of those times be the color of my skin, because that was like the least important thing about each one of those phases of my life. And I do have to say that I'm glad that both he and his wife and his mother, I think his mother's still alive, I'm glad they all survived some serious health issues, especially cancer. Like, I'm really glad that nothing negatively impacted him in that way, and they all recovered safely. So I'm grateful for that. But the other thing that really kind of struck me is significantly odd was where he begins to talk about race at the very, I think it was like chapter 4 or chapter 5, somewhere around there. And he goes on to say race does not exist. And it's like, wait a minute, hold on now. And I'm remembering Dr. Mason. I'm like, where is he going to go with this? If he's admitting that race is not a thing, it's not a biological fact, right? But then he argues for the social definition of race, right? The racial construct that we were all forced into, basically, by old racist men in Europe, and to some degree racist men here. But we're living in under this construct that somebody else gave us that doesn't really make any sense, right? Because race doesn't transcend any further than it just doesn't. I'm stuttering here and I apologize, but race does not translate over across oceans and seas. I'm like, we're all members of the same group. We're all human beings. We just look slightly different. It's like, do bunny rabbits really walk up to each other and look at the color of the fur and determine who they are according to the patterns on their fur? No, they're rabbits. They don't care about anything else other than that. That's a rabbit, and they're not going to eat me, right? I can probably mate with that thing. You know what I mean? And so the way that he moved from admitting that race is not a thing and then moving through to its social utility, it was just kind of like trying to convince the rest of the world that we should be imagining ourselves as a purple people eater rather than a human being. So it just didn't, it vibed wrong with me this time. And then some of the rhetoric that he uses was really kind of concerning, but yeah, it was just weird, really weird. But I'm grateful that I went back and read it, because I was definitely way too harsh on him the first time. And I need to give him a little bit more charity. He is writing this book genuinely because he loves human beings, and he specifically loves racialized black folk. I can't give a man too much guff about that. You know what I mean? What do you guys think?
Well, okay, I will just say this first of all. One thing I noticed is that Kendi is a fantastic writer. He writes very well. He knows how to use words, and I'll give him that credit. Then another thing is, I think a lot of time people's reactions to Kendi was a knee-jerk reaction. I don't think people actually sought to understood where it was coming from, especially given the definitions of race and that's operable in America somewhat. You get, and the reason why I get a better understanding of Kendi now is actually because of Dr. Mason, and a theory of racelessness. So it's making more sense now when he's talking about certain things. For example, when he gives a definition of race, and he says that race is a power construct of collected or merged differences that lives socially. That sort of struck me. I mean, there's something here, because he's telling you that it is not biological. You understand? He's telling you that it is sort of in relation to power. Race has been constructed in relation to different tiers of access to power. You get, for example, in the US, race isn't really biological, because very light-skinned people are referred to as, Meghan Markle is referred to as black or African American, when if you were to do a DNA test, you probably find more European DNA in her than African American DNA. You get, so in that sense, his definition is sort of, that is the only place where I would say, okay, his definition is making sense to me. The way he defined race as, sort of a power construct and all that. So I think that a lot of the conservative voices that critique Kendi, they are doing it out of a knee-jerk reaction, and they are doing it out of the old model of what they understand race to be in America. You get? So in that
Yeah.
sense, I don't think I would disagree with Kendi in that sense, you understand? But my true sense of disagreement is with, okay, his definition of racism and some other terms, you understand, and then his solutions. Those are, then also my other problem is with him taking historical facts and sort of just dropping it onto today's reality. You get, as if, okay, this is what is obtainable today. No, we understand that this is what happened in history, and we understand that those things have lingering effects. But to what extent do those things actually affect nowadays? You understand? And to when he makes two arguments, I would say he makes two broad arguments, which is, once there is a disparity equal to racism, which I don't buy, I disagree with, you understand? And the other one is, the equality of outcome argument, which is he also makes. And that his solution is geared towards getting equality of outcome. So everything, even if it means discriminating against another person of a particular race, just so long as you get a racially equitable outcome, then he's fine. You get? So I think his premise of saying discrimination equals to disparity equals to racism is wrong, is false, in my opinion. And his solution of wanting to get equitable racial outcome by discrimination. Those are the two major points of disagreement that I have with Ken, and also his putting of history into this world.
Right. Why do you think opportunity? Good grief, I can't think of words today. Why do you think equal outcomes is less desirable than opportunity?
Okay, so why I think equal outcomes is less desirable? In theory, it makes sense for you want to have equal outcomes, but there are just so many factors that interplay in life for any outcome. So you have to control for a lot of factors if you want to get truly equitable outcome. You get, so the best deal is to make people have approximately equal opportunity, where when it interacts with all other factors that we cannot control, sort of, it will still produce sort of a hierarchy, you understand? But it's a hierarchy that is born out of one, competence, and it's a hierarchy that is also born out of chance, you understand? It's a hierarchy that is born, it's sort of a much more organic hierarchy that emerges in that sense. But in terms
Right.
of equality of outcome, you would have to fine-tune so many factors. You'd have to fine-tune
Right.
so many factors for you to get. And the process of fine-tuning, you might take so much time fine-tuning those factors that you might not even get anything done in the first place. You might not get any policy passed in the first place. Because Kendi argues that any policy that is producing or sustaining racial inequity is a racist policy. So it means that before you pass any policy, you have to put in place all measures to make sure that the product of that policy has to be to be racially equitable. Let's take, for example, let's say war. I'm just using an hypothetical situation. War on drugs. Maybe there's a policy that criminalizes, say, marijuana. You get. Now, for Kendi, before you can pass that policy, you have to make sure that equal amount of blacks, equal amount of Asians, equal amount of whites will go to jail for that offense. But frankly speaking, it's not possible for you to have equal amount of different races offending at the same rate at the same time. So maybe the black offending rate might be lower, the white offending rate might be higher. In Kendi's mind, that policy has failed. If more whites or more Asians have been arrested for that policy, I'm just thinking in terms of his theory, say more whites and more Asians are being arrested proportionately for that offense, Kendi will look at that and say that no, this policy is racist because there is a disparity in the way this policy affects people of different races. So you might want to have to control for so many factors to make sure that you have an equitable outcome, which I think it's unfeasible.
Yeah. And you know, the thing about that is that using race is a really, it's just not an effective measurement tool, right? Because he doesn't even, you know, many of the arguments that he makes don't include cultural positions or cultural traditions. Some groups of people might behave a certain other way. I mean, we've all heard the jokes about Asian kids and their parents, you know what I mean? So the problem that I find with his argument, when it's solely based off of race and looking at, okay, well, these results don't have a fair number of people that should be succeeding, so therefore it must be a racist or a racially bigoted structure, right? Boy, I cannot think today. Holy cow. Anyways, and that bothers me, right? Because sometimes it's like, okay, well, I mean, look at it, obviously make sure that the system is not discriminating against any individual particularly. But you know, the thing that bothers me is like, it's immediately when he argues like that, it's almost like he's making a monolith out of the people that he's trying to help. Like there's no other variables that could possibly affect an individual's existence, right? Their outcome couldn't be any more different. And dang, we lost. Hopefully we get Charles back in here. But what do you think, Augie?
Yeah, I would like to paint a hypothetical situation. Okay.
Yeah.
So imagine I created a car. Okay. You know, for the purpose of a fast financial gain. You know, however, due to the expediency of my need, I created a car whose functionality is limited, as the car can only run on a one-time 2-hour journey before imploding, right? So I get a group of people and I get them to pay me a tip, you know, for the trip. So say I charge them $100 or $200 for the destination, to our destination. We begin the journey and obviously encounter some bumps here and there, but we stay on course, right? Then an hour 45 minutes into the journey, we get stopped by a cop who informs the passenger of the car's history and limitations, right? So basically saying this guy just wanted to make money. He created this car, and the car only run for 2 hour drive, and you know basically exposes my financial discontent. So we arrive at the destination, okay, safely, or maybe not so safely. But rather than a light, the passengers who have now become acclimatized with the ride are comfortable with the ride and ask me to embark on another journey. So this basically is an analogy of race. Construct created, fraudulent construct, because a group of very, very rich people, or very, very rich nations, were, you know, trying to profitize human, you know, labor. Now, this construct has been thoroughly debunked. There's no basis for it. The American Anthropological Association came out and said it's not objective. There's nothing biological about race. It's fugazi, you know. But somehow, someone who obviously shares this information in his text still wants to, and I think Dr. Mason has a word for it, or I think it's reconstructionist.
Yeah, that would be it. Reconstructionists.
Yes. So, you know, basically cater this totally fictitious construct to gain some form of social economic outcome. Now, the one of the challenges I had, because to a certain degree I kind of see the merit of his argument in terms of like, just looking at policies and trying to create a situation whereby there's equality and equity, right? But to me, when I think about equality and equity, I'm like, well, these are general population terms. Like you can't, man, to what degree can you really racialize um opportunities and outcomes, right?
Yeah.
Like to what degree could you really do it? But I, like I said, I get the spirit of his argument, which is basically more about righting a historical wrong, right? By creating some form of equal footing. But then again, I juxtapose it with this idea of this him situating it within this same construct that operates within a hierarchy. You know what I mean? And I'm like,
Yeah.
if I were to create, if I were on a ladder that was, that I put vertically and I climbed the ladder, and so I'm on the top rung of the ladder, but then I'm saying, well, Charles or Steve, you have to come up to me so we're on equal footing. But based on the construct of that ladder, there's just enough space for just me. And so, the problem again, especially with language, is, sometimes like when people say, when they use terms like racial hierarchy, I'm like, well, it's kind of um, you're saying the same thing, right?
Right.
And that's kind of where I get a little bit cautious, because when you say racial hierarchy, you're trying to explore this idea that there can be a certain level of linear outcomes or linear relationship within a construct that's hierarchical. So yeah, I fundamentally, like, reading this work, there were a lot of, I could see opportunities in terms of what the ideas that Candid's trying to bring forward. But then again, I just oppose that with the fact that he's so historically savvy. And as a matter of fact, even within the text, he goes on to point out the actual roots and causes of these of this race-based construct, but then kind of glosses over it and goes on, well, we have to create discrimination to settle for discrimination of the past.
Right.
So yeah, that's,
well, and the weird thing is that, in I think it was chapter 10 called White, right? He literally he describes in there and states there is no such thing as white. Right? It's he's not interested in cataloging or categorizing all white people are this, or all or I should say all racialized white people are this, or all racialized Asians are this, right? He's like, no, these are individuals, right? And we need to judge them based off of their individuality. But then goes and try and then completely makes the argument for the antithesis of that, which is racial based discrimination. And it's just like, man, you almost had it. You admitted that race didn't exist. You admitted that white didn't exist. And then it's just like he loses it. It's like, No, we got to go back to the race because we got to solve that problem. It's just like, oh, come on, man. You almost had it. Why didn't you argue for the abolition of race? Because that seems to be the biggest problem. But no, it's trying to market, and this is what I think is there's a certain market in this for him, right? What is he going to do once race is removed? Still should be doing the same thing. He's a phenomenal historian. Absolutely phenomenal historian. Stamped was a freaking great book. I have very little problems with Stamped. So it's kind of like where did he go wrong on that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's one of the bigger questions with Kendi, and that's kind of what I found myself um, pondering. Um, and I would just say, it's Steve. To be honest, it's actually really hard for me to pinpoint because on one side of it, when I was interacting with the book, I was seeing a lot of information or perspectives that in its core had a humanistic outlook, which was the argument that he's making, that basically saying, just basically want everyone to be treated as humans. And then, but in the same breath, and I will get actually to the part of the book that I found most most insightful, but I'll get to that sometime during the podcast. So it's for me, it's this it's this whole dichotomy of what are you really trying to say? Because if you're talking about remedying past discriminations with present discriminations that would yield future discriminations, I had to sit in that for a bit and slowly ask myself, well, he's not using discrimination in a generic sense. What I'm actually perceiving that he is basically talking more of racial discrimination.
Yeah.
And this is where, kind of for me in understanding that, okay, look, at the end of the day, it obviously seems to be a conversation about um, economic outcomes, because for one group to discriminate on the other, it's more about the conversation of that the group discriminating getting access to some form of wealth, right? That tends to malign the other group. But then if
Yeah.
there was some form of restitution to get the other group access to some wealth, by default, there must be some other group being discriminated against as well. And is this discrimination basically or primarily economical, or are we discriminating based on the pseudoscientific construct again?
Right.
You see what I
Yeah.
mean?
It keeps coming back to that, and you're just
Yeah.
like, ah, man. What do you think, Charles? You there, Charles?
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know if it's my connection or your connection. Yeah, I'm here. Hear me. Yeah. So, what one other critique I would have of Kendi is, in terms of outcomes, he says people are not the problem, policy is, and
Yeah.
I think that is.
You all right, Charles? Well, I think he's got a bad internet connection.
Yeah.
Again.
I don't.
Dang.
The
Charles, are you
same
there?
argument that
Oh, man, he's going in and out. Dang. Hopefully his
okay,
internet connection.
let me go back out and come back in. Let me go out and
All
come
right.
back in.
All right. What I think Charles was talking about was the way that he determines, or the way that he suggests that we look at policy in a racial way, right? But it's hard to do that for the fact that there's demographics within certain racial demographics, and then there's more there's more God, I wish I could talk today. They're not monoliths. These racialized groups are not monoliths. They're all very drastically different. And who's to say that the cause of the failure of whatever system that you're doing or you're using has to be racial? Is kind of like that's the go-to for them, right? It's the go-to for Kendi. And I wish he would have been a little bit more investigative in his ideas and really kind of tried to find more ways to measure the failure so that we have better ways of measuring the success. Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
Okay, so I said another critique that I have of Kendi is that he's basically making the same argument that conservatives are making, but he just flips it on the head. So when he says that people are not the problem, people don't need to change, people don't need to improve, that the problem is policy, you understand? And once you change policy, everything falls in place. And that's the same argument that, say, conservatives are making when they say policy is not the problem, people are the problem. People need to change.
Yeah.
You understand? But I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. Policy needs to change, people need to change. Because if you have good policy and people's behavior are not aligned with good policy, you're still going to find some of these problems that you're seeking to solve. And if you have good people and you don't have good policy, you're going to find the same problem. So it's still a binary, you understand, which is something he doesn't address. He just states people are okay, it is a policy issue. I don't think that's true. I think that people have a lot to work on themselves. And yes, policy too, there's some policies that should be worked on and some policies that should be changed. And when those two sides meet somewhere in the middle, then you get a better outcome. But just arguing for the changing of policy, it's really not going to do much without a corresponding change in people's behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Charles, can I just quickly say something that in terms of policy, I know, like, doing historical studies, like you could look at the formation of the United States. I mean, it wasn't United States, but it was the colony of Virginia, and even to a certain degree in Canada here. And if you look, for instance, at the Black Codes, right, you could look at that body of law, and its spirit, its core was basically targeting a group, right? You could also look at aspects of Jim Crow laws or the Indian policy here, right? You could from the letter of the law, you could see that this has a group in its focus that it's basically trying to malign. But then when I look at his definitions, for instance, a racist is one who's supporting a racist policy. Now, using a 21st century lens, through their actions or inactions, expressing a racist idea.
Yeah.
And an anti-racist is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. The question that comes to my mind is, when you make such stark or make such stark definitions, which obviously polarizes groups and also doesn't really account for one, individual knowledge or competencies around even being able to articulate or understand the outcome of policies. Like, because at the end of the day, people vote based on self-interest, right? Within a 21st century, within a 21st century lens. And then when I look, for instance, at the Canadian Constitution that says something to the effect of people should not be discriminated on based on gender, race, and religion.
Yeah.
I now I'm now basically trying to ask myself how does someone have does someone have the wherewithal to even tell or know that the outcome of a policy that a policy one is targeting a particular group, and that the outcomes of that said policy may lead to some form of discrimination. You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Well, the thing for me is that I'm looking in the comments, and it's like, okay, so what Kendi is arguing for, and what many others argue for the continuation of using race, is, to me, the definition of insanity, because we've been doing that, and it's still a problem. You know what I mean? It's been a problem for 500 years. Like, at what point do we learn our lesson? Be like, you know what? It's probably time to change the operating system that we're functioning under for something better and something more truthful and something more scientifically true than what might be a social construct that may have utility to some people. Sounds, and that's the thing that I had the hardest time with Kendi and D'Angelo, is that they assume that the entire majority of the individuals who identify one way will all fall under the same ideas and ideologies and perspectives, and we all know that's not true, right? We also know that racism doesn't cross borders in the same way that it does here in the United States. But even then, racism that I've noticed operates differently in Tennessee than it would in Utah. It also operates different in, let's say, Nigeria versus Utah, or the UK versus Nigeria, right? So every single one of those little spheres of culture and individuals in history are going to be vastly different. So what Kendi is describing could feasibly, in some locations, function, but to assume that it's going to cover the wide swath of society and have it be completely foolproof and function well is kind of a wet dream. But he does address that. I got to give him credit for that. He does address it. He's like, we've got to be able to change the laws as we see fit and not lose our attention, not lose our goal. We need to, if something fails, we need to get rid of it, move on, find the next solution until we get it right. I was like, okay, I'm kind of okay with that. I've got a few issues with it, but I mean, I kind of like that. But it just, for me, it just keeps coming back to the same thing. It's like, okay, well, who is this book written for? Just all racialized white people, some racialized black people, or all racialized black people, or just everybody, because it doesn't seem that he's being very specific about who he's actually speaking to.
I think you brought up Robin DiAngelo just now. So I think DiAngelo is the lightweight, because if you look at their position on race, it's almost diametrically opposed. Kendi is almost sort of arguing that race doesn't exist. Racism is not racism is sort of your attitudes on very specific issues or very specific occasion. It doesn't really define you as a person. You understand? You can be racist on this policy, I'll be anti-racist on another policy, which I think he's onto something. He probably is just label it something else. But with D'Angelo says that you are racist as a white person, whether you like it or not. Whether you act or
Yeah.
not, you are racist. You understand?
Yeah.
Whether you sanction it or not, you are racist. You are just by the mere fact that you're existing, you are already racist. You don't have to do anything. But Kendi, on the other hand, says no, that's not the case. You have to treat these things not only on an individual basis, but also on a case by case basis. You understand? So, which is what is different from what D'Angelo is saying. So D'Angelo is on another. To me, she's not. So she's on another class of her own.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's not get into D'Angelo. We can probably tear her book apart another time. But Augie, what do you think about that?
What I think this is, I would just like to, maybe segue a little bit into actually, I guess creating some form of baseline understanding of what these terms are, and the reason why I feel, most people struggle in your understanding, when we start to use, certain words. So when we're talking about, race or racial categories, we're basically talking about black, white, um, American Indian. I think they say Asian or Pacific Islander, and I know that the categories keep changing, but they are, I guess, lampposts, or sorry, they're signs that lets us, have strong a stronger understanding slash control of what we mean when we say certain, when we say certain things. And in reading Kendi's work, I would say I read it more as a race skeptic. And in doing that, Steve, this is something that you've also highlighted.
Yeah.
What I was basically getting, what actually made it a little bit challenging for me is race-based language is always a language that centers on homogeneity. You're not able to heterogize or individualize out of that homogeneous grouping. And that's the reason why, from the perspective of, transatlantic slavery, it was such a pernicious concept, because because the bourgeoisie, or the colonial bourgeoisie, were basically putting, enslaved Africans in this homogeneous group based on their phenotype. That's kind of how we arrive at black.
Yeah.
So, and Kendi, like, he tries to navigate the the homogeneous waters, but I don't think he was successful at all. I kind of felt that, he tripped on himself and confused himself a lot, because he was making these attempts to, you know to argue for individual identity, and also argue for group identity at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, Charles, coming back to, I mean, I haven't read D'Angelo's work, and just off of the top of my head, the way I would rationalize what she said about, and sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, about white. She said white people are inherently racist.
Yeah. She says all white people are racist. And if you question that, then you are exempling the evidence of white fragility. So it's like a Kafka trap. So it would be like me telling you, Ogie, I think you're a murderer. And you're like, I'm not a murderer. And if I said, yeah, but that's exactly what a murderer would say.
Yeah.
Like she literally pulls that in the book. It's the most ridiculous garbage I've ever read.
Okay. So what I would extrapolate from that comment, and I'm not speaking on behalf, but the way it sounded to me is more like she's saying, or she's attempting to say, the construction of whiteness or white itself as a racial category, because this is what it is. So I think she's maybe trying to tie it to the racial category itself. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But then this is kind of where we fall into the trap of language, because the category in itself is it's homogeneous group.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it you know what I would, the more I read, the more I read Kendi's work, and I was just so happy that I came in contact with Dr. Sheena Mason when I did. Because I think with the theory of racistness, one, it really, really gives us a platform to be very intentional about language, understanding that, when we say certain things, we automatically just drop people in the basket of homogeneity. That's inextricably what we're doing. And the more we keep doing that, the less it becomes defendable to say, oh, I am just an individual. You know what I mean? Oh, I am just an individual with, this behavior or this strength or these weaknesses do not tie me to a group, while still using group-based language.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So I want to answer Coach Love. She asked the question, how does racism show up differently in Tennessee versus Utah? And this is going back to what I believe Kendi is overlooking in some ways, is that each state has its own racial history. Some states are very close together in that racial history, and then some states are very drastically different. Take, for example, Utah. I mean, we have a lot of Mormons here. Mormons did not treat racialized black folk very well at first. Like, really, they did not. I don't want to get into it, but they did not. Okay. We don't have a big population of racialized black folk, but we do have a large racialized Hispanic population. And racism occurs more to them than it does the racialized black community. And then if you go up to Idaho, it gets really weird, because Idaho was this last bastion sanctuary of white supremacy and Klan members, right? I grew up in Idaho in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, when they still had a fully functioning KKK group there. They had an office in downtown Pocatello. And there were very few racialized black people there. It was very sparse. It was, most of them were centered around Boise, where most of the wealthy, the wealthy elitists would be living. But yeah, a lot of them moved out. A lot of them moved out of the state, and it became a very, very white state, to say the least. Right. So racism is going to show up in different ways in Idaho than it would in Utah and to Tennessee. And so we kind of have to look at what I believe we kind of have to look at race in a more fluid way, kind of like water, right? It's going to manifest itself in different ways at different times, at different places, and at different points along the river. And we have to have a sense of how we can work with that, right? We have to have some kind of a boat that we can maneuver down that river that isn't trying to fight the river, but go with it, so that we can find all of the places that we need to address, instead of just having this kind of very steely, unmalleable kind of system that honestly up until now has still been failing. Right. But with the theory of racelessness, and even with the theory of racelessness, I like it because it actually does bring in a little bit of nuance there. Actually, a lot of nuance in trying to destroy the ideology of supremacy, right? Especially white supremacy. Like, I think everybody here would agree that destroying white supremacy would be a good thing. You know what I mean? Nobody's going to argue for it here. But I think, and this is how I feel about it, is after talking to Dr. Mason so much and other people, it seems to me like starting off our exploration of how racism manifests itself in society, we should probably start off with the truth that it doesn't, that racism absolutely does exist, but race is not a biological truth. We should start with that as the basis for and foundation of our investigation from then on, because at least then we would have a metric by which we could use. And that's why I'm so upset that Kendi, like, he came so close to that, and then he just kind of floundered and went right back into, you know, the standard, you know, racial supremacy, you know. But yeah, that's I don't want to go off too far on there. But Coach Love, I hope that answers your question. If not, let's get together later and talk about that.
Yeah.
But yeah. What kind of definitions did you not like, Charles?
So I just want to jump right in. Right? Okay, what kind of definitions of Kendi I did not like?
Well, I was just curious. You said you didn't like some of his definition. Yeah. Yeah, you said that you didn't like some of his definitions.
Yeah. Basically, it was basically his definition of racism and racists, which were circular. You understand? It was still the same thing. And then when I delved further to find out, okay, what are those racist policies? And the definition of racist policies is it didn't solidify my faith in his previous definition of race and previous definition of racism and racist, because he says a racist policy is any policy which produces or sustains racial inequity. And the truth be told is that a policy need not even be racist, in my understanding, for it to produce racial inequity or for it to produce disparity. You understand? Because there are all sorts of disparities. Like Thomas Sowell will argue that if you take white people of Russian descent and white people of German descent in America, you're going to find some disparity in terms of income. Is that racism? You understand? By any metric you want to measure, and by any categorization, you are going to find disparity. Let's say you want to take people who are 5 foot and under and people who are 5 foot above. You want to take their income, their average income. You're going to find a disparity between both groups. So what caused that? Is it heightism? You get? So there is basically no metric of measurement or classification that you're going to use that you're not going to find some form of disparity. And this disparity just reflects the natural interactions of certain factors. Racism might be one of the factors, but to say that once there's a disparity equal to racism, that's simply not true. That definition doesn't hold water enough for me to say his definition of racism or racist as anyone who supports a racist policy, for that definition to even make sense in the first place. So to me, in a whole, Kendi sort of undermines his own argument when, first of all, he argues that, for example, a black person can be racist if they hold a racist idea. You understand? He himself said he used to be racist because he used to hold racist ideas. Now, if a black person can be racist and a white person can be anti-racist, yet you are calling for race-based affirmative action. So in that sense, it means that you should be sorting out all the anti-racists and applying the positive discrimination for them, irrespective of their skin color. And you should be sorting out all the racists and discriminating against them irrespective of their skin color. You get?
Yeah.
But what he's doing is that he's still going to apply those principles, those discriminatory principles, to any white person, whether the white person is racist or anti-racist. You understand? And he's going to apply the positive discrimination to any black person, whether the black person is holding a racist idea or not holding a racist idea. So it just sort of undermines his argument, which is why I think that he's mislabeling things. He has actually identified a problem. You understand? But he's just labeling them things that they are not. And it sort of just, undermines his own argument. That's what he does in the book.
Yeah, I can see that. And there was another part of the book that I remember. He was discussing cancer and how he likened racism to cancer. And I don't have an argument with that. What I do have an argument with is that he didn't go far enough, right? What is cancer? Cancer is the uncontrollable growth of cells. Basically, that's what cancer is. And I would view race as the uncontrollable cell replicating uncontrollably, right? That causes cancer, which is racism, and that causes death, much like Leonard Harris would argue, necro being. And so I just wish he would have taken it that extra next step, because I wonder where he would have gone if he would have followed that logic through. Because he's not a stupid man by any means. He's a very smart man, well spoken, knows his history. You know what I mean? And it's just like, damn, like I really wanted him to kind of investigate into that vein of thought. You know what I mean? I'm curious as to what you guys think about, or is there something else that you guys wanted to talk about? Because
I for one would say what I found to be the most insightful part of the book, even though I had to kind of climb through hills and mountains to kind of get what I felt hit to the heart of Candy's perspective. I would just surmise it as class. I think that's an element that he presented within his perspective that I would say creates far tangible opportunities for resolution on issues pertaining to racism. And one of the insightful interactions that he brought forward was captured in this quote. He says, criticism of Black people when we blame them for their own votes being stolen or accuse them of the lethargy and self-sabotage. How is our criticism of Black people any different from the anti-Black criticism of white racist?
I'm glad that you brought that up. I love that part.
Yeah.
Absolutely love that part.
So he goes in to say, I learned in that office that day that every time I say something is wrong with Black people, I am simultaneously separating myself from them, essentially saying them N-words. When I do this, I am being racist. Now, this was a minute part, but there was obviously a far greater picture, because Candy was basically trying to kind of highlight the issues that happened with what I would say are elitist, racialized Black folks, and non-elitist, or I'd say the rank and file racialized Black folks, which to me speaks to the fact that a lot of times what racism hides a lot of class, um, 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 hides a lot of class struggles even within a group. And I think Kendi was trying to work that piece out, and that for me was one of the more important pieces, because within the structure of that argument, I was like, well, at least we have clarity on what we're actually looking at, because now with class we can see where economics and politics fits in. But then in a similar in another example, he was basically comparing analyzing the, I think it was a 2004, uh, when did George Bush win presidency, when he went
Oh
against
man,
Al Gore. That was it.
I don't. It's forever
2004, I
ago.
think. And
Yeah.
he was basically saying, there were a lot of fraudulent practices that basically swayed um, the vote to George Bush. From just more from the Republican Democratic side. But then the question I was asking myself in Kendi creating that, and then basically attributing that to racism, is, well, they are also racialized black folks that voted for um, Bush. So are you basically, are you like, why are you making that distinction? And yes, that there probably was fraudulent electoral practice, but they are also members of that population that voted Republican. You see what I'm saying? So how do you, because then, like, the binary racism, racial stuff, you know, it's so it's so pernicious in the sense that when something is going in favor for one group, they tend to see themselves more as the good guys. So it's us good Democrats against the bad, white supporting Republicans, without necessarily, as as Stanley would say, without necessarily factoring in the nuances. Because on one side you talk about black people, but then it's hard to understand why member or members of that population would vote on different party lines. And so why is that a problem? And that obviously ties into the political side of things. So yeah,
Right.
that's kind of my spiel on that. That was one part of it that I found very, very interesting, because I was like, okay, wow, now he's actually bringing out the class element, but he didn't stay in there for too long.
Yeah. Gotcha. I'd like to end the podcast at about an hour and a half. So I'm what do you guys, final thoughts on the conversation that we had today? I know that we covered kind of like back and forth and around, and but this is supposed to be just kind of a talking circle. We're around the campfire having a discussion about what's going on and our opinions about things. I'm trying not to make it like too strict. Like, I don't want this to be debate style. I don't want to. I don't want to be that stressed out. But what do you guys think? How did we do for the first time?
Oh, fantastic! I think we did well. Um, it's not any different from what we normally do on my show. You get so. I think it was okay, but normally in my show, I let people call in after a while. Other, multiple people can call in, and we just talk and all that. But as regards my final thoughts for today, I wanted to address something that Kendi talked about when he talked about assimilationist, abolitionist, no, assimilationist, segregationist, and anti-racist. Now, let's say there is nothing like race, but there sure is something like culture. And I know Stanley is going to fight me for this, but I have to say it. Kendi says no One who's anti-racist is one who's expressing the idea that racial groups are equals and none needs developing, and is supporting policy that reduces racial inequity. Now let's remove race and put culture there, and just read that statement again and say, anti-racist, one is expressing the idea that cultural groups are equals and none needs developing, and is supporting policy that reduces cultural inequity. Now, from my plain definition of culture, culture is the way of life of a people. I don't think that there is any culture in this world that doesn't need development, however advanced it is. I don't think that there is any culture in this world that is at its peak, that it's at its zenith, that there's nothing that you can fine tune about it. Different cultures have different peculiarities. And in these peculiarities, there are also issues. You understand? No, though I get where he's coming from, in the sense that he wants to say that there is nothing wrong with Black people. Stop saying it is Black people's behavior that is causing this problem. That's the sense in which he's saying it. But when you look at it from another angle, he's also telling you that don't do anything about, some of the things in your communities. You understand? It's all about policy. You don't have to change anything about your behavior. It's all about policy. But you also have to factor in the cultural aspects as well. And we will keep making reference to, say, the Asians, for example. If you have people who are so hyper focused on education, they put their children through school, and it's going to somehow affect their educational outcome, right? Irrespective of the policy. So if, for
Yeah.
example, you have two households where one is focused on, you need to study hard, you need to get your grades up, and the other where they don't you they that's they don't emphasize such habits. You understand? Even if you have a great policy, you're going to have disparate outcomes in that situation. So in that case, what would be more effective in giving you a more equitable outcome is if there is a shift in the behavior of one of those groups. You understand? Either this group decides to also not study so that everybody fails as well, or these other groups decide to, okay, let's study so that everybody passes equally. But when you just say all we need to do is to make policy, well, one policy can be, say, abolish all tests. That way everybody passes. But what happens to learning? What happens to the, actually getting some education and all that? You don't really get it. But the policy is trying to force equal outcomes, and the results will not be so fantastic. So in that sense, I sort of disagree with him that no culture needs developing. I think cultures all over the world, they need developing. I'm not just being specific about one culture. All cultures, if you take culture as the way of life of a people, all cultures need developing. And also policies need to change as well for us to get to the equitable outcome that Kendi is looking for. So those are my final thoughts. Thank you, Steve, for having me on.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. What about you, Augie?
Yeah, I guess my final thoughts. I just wanted to maybe quickly touch on. I think Coach Erica is asking how theory of racistness addresses phenotypical differences. For my understanding, and I know obviously Dr. Mason can speak better to this. Um, I don't. Um, Phenotypical differences doesn't account for race. It's just basically more something um, nature endowed, biological given. However, um, it's more the perversion of people's, like God given biological features that then create racialization, or that then people attribute to be a race based feature. So it kind of the way I'd explain it is people's biological feature has nothing to do with race, because race doesn't exist. But then people's interpretation of that, which accounts to them racializing individuals on account of their biological features is, kind of what leads to racism and race-based behaviors. Finally, I would say it was a very interesting read, although I had to stop myself multiple times because once again it was just more the conflation of what I would want to in an ideal world want to see as brilliant ideas, because at the end of the day, I think the spirit of how to be an anti-racist is more geared towards creating policies that are equitable and policies that promote the advancement of equal opportunities. But the challenge is when you juxtapose that with this malleable construct of race, it just basically creates problems. So yeah, I would still probably give it a, because this was my second time, it's the time out reading it, so I'll probably give it a third read if I can. But I think yeah, it's it's definitely not going to be one of my go-to books.
Right.
No, yeah, definitely won't be using Candy as a go-to resource.
Yeah. And for me, I really
Yeah,
wanted to
sorry,
like the
Steve.
guy.
Just one
Oh yeah.
last thing, Steve. Uh, yeah. So I
Go
would
ahead,
just
Charles.
say, do you guys realize how different this conversation and analysis would have been if we hadn't come in contact with Dr. Mason's theory of racelessness? This would have been another conversation. This would have been a shit piling on Kendi. Really, I think sort of our exposure to Dr. Mason's work is making us appreciate Kendi's perspective a little bit more than if we hadn't been familiar with her work. And I think this is a problem that many people run into, including the Glenn Lowrys and all that, because they don't understand this other perspective, based on the old model of what race and racism is. They're just going to see Kendi and be like, no, this guy is talking trash. So in a way,
Yeah.
there are some areas, there's some cross-pollination. And I think if Kendi would just, do away with his racial labels, I think he's onto something. Yeah.
Yeah. I really wanted to like Kendi, and I actually do. I think he's a good human being. I think he's a good man. He's an excellent historian. I believe that he's honestly trying to do something that is good for humanity. I believe some of his points are really good, and like I've said many times today, he came so close to the theory of racelessness so many times and just kind of dropped the ball. It was really frustrating. But you are right. Like, would I have had this same kind of a conversation a year ago before meeting Dr. Mason, and having that perspective, that scientific perspective, and the philosophic perspective that she's putting forward? Yeah, I don't think I know I wouldn't have had the same perception this time if I hadn't got it. It would have been just the same. I would have just had the same interpretation. But now I'm able to critique ideas and filter those ideas way better than I was able to before. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add, Kendi obviously is not. He's not a post-racialist. So he does state that in the book. So he probably won't be too open to or maybe he will, Dr. Sheena Mason's idea, because he kind of feels it's idealistic, which is neither here nor there. But yeah, that's a good thing to note.
Well, and that's what I was going to get to too, is that when you write a book like this, I mean, you're emotionally and financially invested in it.
Yeah,
right? So you almost have to fight for it, regardless if a better idea comes along. You still have to fight for your idea, you know, which is so odd because he refuses to debate his ideas. Like Coleman Hughes put up, I think it was like $10,000 or some ridiculous amount of money to try and get him on, and Kendi refused. And it's just like, come on, man, you know, show us that you got the gum, you know, show us that you got the stuff. You know, let us hear your perspective. Let us hear your ideas. Let's hear the arguments coming from your mouth, and let's answer some of these questions that instead of everybody just assuming what you mean and making conflations or exaggerations or arguments that you yourself didn't even make, go debate your ideas and answer those questions before they become bigger problems and your ideas get misrepresented, like I believe Chris Rufo and James Lindsay do frequently. But yeah, I'm sorry that I was not more with it today, guys. It was just a weird day from the get-go. But I really appreciate you guys coming and having this conversation with me, and hopefully we'll be able to do it again sometime soon. I will definitely be more prepared with questions. I'm gonna be a lot more prepared next time. You know, the first time is always the time where you're like, I'm just gonna wing it and see what happens, because you don't know what to expect, right? So I have kind of an idea of what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
But now I think, having done this, and you know, I'm still new to StreamYard. You know, this is a part of the learning curve. You know what I mean? We're on the bottom of the bell, and I think I think I'm gonna get better as time goes on. But it's, you know, having guests on here like you guys who are avid readers and can argue a good point and accept a criticism and let people finish their sentences and their ideas so that we can actually like know what they're saying instead of assuming. You know, it's refreshing, and I love it, and I want more of that. You know what I mean? So I really appreciate both of you guys coming on here and having this conversation with me.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm just glad to be here.
So yeah, thanks everybody for coming and watching. Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming and watching, and really appreciate you guys' support, and we'll see you sometime soon.
Okay, bye guys.